Welcome to Jewish Cinémathèque, where we meet some of the important faces involved with films that tackle aspects of the Jewish experience. Today, I'm joined by filmmaker Keith Thomas, the director of The Vigil, and the star of the film, Dave Davis. The Vigil is no ordinary motion picture. It's actually a horror film set in Brooklyn's Hasidic neighborhood with dialogue that is largely Yiddish.
Extremely sorry for your loss.
You have to leave now.
בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל.
This is Litbach. There is something very, very wrong here. We have to go now.
ועל מה תברא כרותי, בימליך מלכותי, ויצמח פורחני וקרב משיחי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בהגנה ובחיים.
So Keith and Dave, welcome to Jewish Cinémathèque. It's really very special to have you.
Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So I guess the first question is a Jewish horror film. Now, I have to admit to you guys, and you'll appreciate this, when I was a kid, I would read about Ashmedai and Lilith. But how did you decide to go in this direction? Keith, let me just start with you. Where did this come from?
I'd been a horror film and horror fiction fan most of my life. And I knew when it came time for me to kind of embark on what I was going to hoped would be my first film as a writer director, that it was going to be horror. I knew, okay, that's the genre I want to be working in. That's the one I know. And then, there's an old adage for writers that you write what you know. And especially when it comes to a genre that is pretty, there are a lot of horror films out there. So it was like, how do I come up with something new, with something fresh? Is it you try to do another spin on the zombie sort of thing, or do you try to do another vampire film that feels different? And yeah, you could come up with ideas, but it came down to, well, what personally do I know that other people might not know, that I don't think I've seen before? And there have been Jewish horror films. Obviously there's the Goldman films from forever ago that kind of tackle some Jewish mythology. There are Dybbuk films. There's a few Dybbuk films from Hollywood that involve people coming across Dybbuk boxes and accidentally opening them. There was the wonderful film from Poland that involved a Dybbuk. But all those films were not set in Jewish communities. They involved mostly non-Jews encountering a Jewish sort of entity and having to track down a rabbi to deal with it, which is kind of like that standard trope. But we need the priest. Okay, for these ones, we need the rabbi. So I said, okay, that's my angle. I can make a horror film that is truly Jewish, that is set in a Jewish community, that involves a Jewish sort of horror iconography and themes that are intrinsic to Jewish experience. I wrote that first script very quickly, the first draft of it. It was not set in Brooklyn originally. And I was lucky enough to find some producers through my manager who are Orthodox Jews who make horror films almost exclusively. And so it was just kind of this match made in heaven. And so they said, great.
You found Orthodox Jews who make horror films, but the horror films aren't Jewish. So you had to be the one to bring them a Jewish horror film. Yeah,
if you were to ask them, they would say they never envisioned making a Jewish horror film. But of course, everyone would tell them, hey, you guys with your yarmulkes, you should make a Jewish horror film. And so this came across their desks and they said, this might be it. This might be the one. Like, maybe this will convince us that we should do this. And that was it. That was it. It was great. The day I first met them, they're both very young. And
the names are?
Yeah, so it's JD Lifshitz and Rafi Margolis, who their company's called Boulder Light. They're in LA. They're from Long Island, have a lot of family in Borough Park, but they live in LA. And when I first met them, I went to their office and I was like, okay, let's see what this is about. And I walk in and here are two guys, modern Orthodox guys who have yarmulkes on, who are sitting in a room filled with horror memorabilia. It's all over the walls. And I'm like, wow, this is perfect. Because they're going to get every reference. They're going to understand exactly where I'm coming from on this. And they did.
Now, you bring a very interesting background to the film. I mean, you originally went to school, you were playing with pre-med, and then you went to Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute for Religion in New York City. I mean, what was going on? Where were you headed at that particular point? And what moved you in a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is I had no idea where I was headed. And that's kind of how it all happened. I had wanted to be, when I was young, I dreamed about being a filmmaker and working, but it just seemed to me that there was no in. Like, I didn't know people in the industry. It just felt like that doesn't happen, that you can't do that. So I went to college and I was pre-med. I come from a big family of physicians and scientists. And after I, kind of switched back and forth, while in college, I studied film, but not filmmaking. I studied, academic, like film criticism, particularly European film, and then English. And I thought, I'll be a teacher. So that's how I got in the education thing. And then just being involved in synagogue, I thought, okay, my wife, who wasn't my wife at the time, we were just dating, but she was going to New York for her grad school. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll go check out HUC. So I went, and I loved studying theology. And in fact, my master's thesis was on monsters in the Torah. So it was the same sort of thing. And then I kind of came out and I was like, I should have gone to med school. So, so then I ended up in doing, working for 10 years in clinical research, which also plays a role in this film, because for a number of years, I did research with elderly folks with dementia in nursing homes. And that's where the Miss Litbach kind of character comes directly from experiences that I had there. The whole time I was writing, and it was books, and then it was screenplays. And, I finally, after decades after the high school dream or idea, I finally, took a chance on making a film, and I made a short film, and that kind of spiraled into this. So yeah, it was one of those things. I taught screenwriting before at film school, and people ask, could I use, looking at your history, is that a good path to becoming a filmmaker? And it's absolutely not, because I wandered around doing all sorts of random stuff before I essentially kind of failed into filmmaking. I didn't make it I didn't become a doctor. And so this is where I ended up.
Amazing. Dave, so I'm sitting there watching you, and you have this incredible filmography of all of the work that you've done, and you open your mouth and Yiddish is coming out. What was that all about, and how was that for you?
That was a real challenge, and it was such a pleasure to be able to delve into a character like that, and to learn about a community that I previously had not known much about. And yet it ended up being that it was a community that was very personal to me. I learned a lot about my family heritage. I learned about the community that I could have been a part of had my great grandparents had a little bit of a different point of view when we came to the country. The language itself was a thrill to learn. And I realized through the filming process how much Yiddish I actually already knew, which was a surprise to me. At one point, Menashe, one of our actors, and I were on the streets in Borough Park. We were surrounded by people speaking Yiddish and asking us about the film and what we were doing. And people knew Menashe and they would come up to him and speak to him. And one guy came up and said something to him, and I could tell Menashe's face kind of distorted a little bit. And I was asking him constantly, what did they say? What did that say? What does this word mean? And I said, what did that guy say? And he goes, oh, that guy, he's a nudge. And I went, nudge? I know that word. My mom's been calling me a nudge my whole life. So it was lots of little details like that where it was a beautiful experience to get to delve into the Yiddish and to learn more about my own culture.
So a number of the actors, Menashe and Malki Goldman, are Yiddish speakers, and they come from that world. And here you had to take the role of someone who is breaking away from that Hasidic world and struggling with that departure. And it's interesting, departure. This film is about departure. And Keith, the beginning is built so beautifully in terms of the struggle that these young people have who've broken away from their community, trying to find a place in society. So, Dave, you're sitting around the table with these other breakaways. And did you connect in any way in terms of their struggle and maybe just your finding your Jewish roots? So they're sort of breaking away and you're coming in.
Absolutely. And, early scene in the film when we're sitting around the table like that, that was not the first time that I'd had the pleasure of sitting around a table like that with people like that, who I really got to learn about, and the struggles of leaving a community. And as Keith says, having one foot in and one foot out at times. And I really got to become close with a few people. And I wanted to learn about their experience so that Yaakov, I never wanted to be doing an imitation of an accent. I wanted to understand why people speak the way they do. When was your first interaction with, a Hollywood film? Did you have any American English in your household growing up? Was it not until you were 12 years old that you started to be exposed to different accents? How much do you think about your accent when you're out? Do you try to actively change it to sound more American or more secular? And to be able to have that sort of connection with people whose real lives experience were not dissimilar from Yaakov's was really a privilege and an honor to be welcomed into a community that has a lot of struggles and a lot of joy. And it was one of the biggest challenges of my life to try to bring authenticity to that character and that voice. And I found it extremely rewarding.
Wonderful. Keith, I'm sitting there watching the film and, I'm expecting, I see these young people and they're struggling, but then all of a sudden I see the magic of the horror film. Your amazing technique of the use of music, as well as your camera motions. It seems like we're pulling back all the time or we're pulling in, and I think, is that what the basic centerpiece of this film is? Searching, coming together, or withdrawing?
Yeah, I think that for me, that's a very important piece of it. It's interesting, the themes of the film in terms of guilt and in terms of trauma and inherited trauma. And it's also about time. There's that old saying, time heals all wounds. But it doesn't really, does it? And it's kind of like how we navigate those. I wanted the film to kind of come into that question of, here's a guy who is broken in some ways, that has made that brokenness has led to him leaving the community. And I love the idea of this sort of character in crisis. He's left, he's in a new world, technically for him. He's dealing with it. And now he has to go back. And that's a crazy place to put somebody. At the same time, when he gets to this house, well, he wants to be out of that house. And what's going to happen? Is he going to go back to the house? And it was that constant coming and going. It's the entity at the center of the film, the mazik, in terms of its what it represents, the history coming back all the time, the history constantly reminding us. And so I wanted that sort of that structural framework to be inherent in the way the film was made. So my DP, Zach Cooperstein, and I really came up very early with this concept of movement. For me, it's very important that camera work not be showy for the sake of doing some showy camera work. I don't, it's cool to see a camera pass through a door, a keyhole, and then zoom around a desk and then come up into someone's face. But if it has no intrinsic value in terms of the actual story, then it's just a move for the sake of a move. Whereas we really wanted the camera to be moving, motivated by what was happening and by what was being experienced. And so all those things of coming and going, of the kind of the sort of movement through the house was going to be in the camera work. So, it'd be very easy to you can make the film cheaper if you went handheld and kind of just, we're just there. It would probably be more intimate in some ways too, and it'd be a little more visceral. But I really prefer a much more traditional sort of movement of the camera, of the prowling sort of omnipotent eye. And so it was, once we decided to make that move, it became challenging, especially since our house was a very real house and it was very small. And so we had done tons of dolly track we're laying down and moving. And that was a big camera that Zach's like sitting on. You see these, it's like a little train he's on there. And so, that definitely added to the atmosphere. But, baked into the same thing, when I first met with my producers, they said, "What if you boiled this film down to one word, what would that be in terms of like what people would feel?" And that word was dread. And so the camera work, and then especially the sound design, had to be as evocative of that word as possible.
Dave, it's interesting that Keith made a choice. It almost seems like, there are location shots, but one of the locations that Keith chooses extensively is your face. How was it to act for that? I mean, the camera is literally right on top of you.
Well, I've often said in the past, one of my least favorite things to do as an actor is to be afraid because you have to really live in it. And I made an attempt of staying in that fear for the better part of a month and a half. I didn't allow myself to be soothed out of that fear. I remember there was one really intense scene where Yaakov finally sort of confronts his trauma and lets it out. And when we finished filming that, it was such a wave of relief for me because I had been living in this pain of this character, and the pain that is the source of his fear in this film for so long at that point, that when Yakov finally had this healing moment as an actor, it was like, oh God, I feel better now. And so how was it? It was, I felt a lot of trust. I felt a lot of faith that Keith and the team knew what they were doing. And Keith gave me a lot of freedom as an actor to go through what I needed to go through to get to where I needed to be. So in some ways, it was a pleasure and a joy and a catharsis to exist within that fear and that pain. And in some ways, it was an incredible challenge to confront myself and my connections with this character and his pain and fear and the community's pain and fear and struggle, which is my own struggle as well. So as an actor, we have to love those painful things and those painful moments. And we have to find joy in the anger we act and the sorrow we act and in the fear that we act. So it was a joy and it was a struggle.
And it's a joy to have watched you. Just terrific. Let's take a break now and look at a clip from Keith Thomas's incredible horror film, The Vigil.
Is his head turned backwards? Can you tell me?
What?
Is his head turned around, Yaakov? Yaakov, what do you see?
Dr. Colbert, can you hold on for 1 second, please? Hello?
Yakov, hi, it's Dr. Kohlberg. Look, I just got your message, and I'm sorry it's taken me a little bit to call you back. I hope everything's all right. Yakov.
Dr. Colbert, can you hold on for 1 second, please? Hello?
Yaakov.
Who is this?
Yaakov.
I need you to leave me alone.
Why did you let me die?
Keith, the film is titled The Vigil, which in a certain sense is your translation of the word Shmira. Can you explain, give us a little background on the thrust of the film, the storyline?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so essentially the film is about this man, Yakov Ronan, who has left the Hasidic community for various reasons that we learn as the night proceeds. And he has been called back to be a shomer or shoimer and to sit the vigil, to watch over the body of a deceased man, Mr. Litbach, in his house before the Haver Kadisha can take the body in the morning. So it's just an overnight job. He's brought back into the community essentially by Reb Shulam, played by Menashe Lustig, who is a character that he knows. And apparently Yaakov has done this. He's been a shomer, which in the ultra-Orthodox community, there are paid shomers, people who will sit the vigil when there is no family or friends to do it. And as soon as he gets in the house and he's sitting there alone with that body, he realizes he's not alone. There's something else in this house. I was amazed when I sat down to write the script that I had never seen a film about a shomer. It seemed crazy that such a wonderful setup for a horror film had not been utilized. I learned later after we began production that there were several scripts actually floating around that involved shomers, but not set in the community the way this is or dealing with the same things. But I felt like a unique opportunity to say, hey, this is an interesting angle, both for a story, but also something that most people don't know about, this ritual of watching the bodies.
Yeah, I'm just the very nature of watching the bodies. Why are we watching the bodies? Mm-hmm. And this sort of this transition period between life and death and lending itself so nicely to issues of intercession or ghosts or demons or whatever it might be. In the 1930s film, The Ditbach, the Yiddish film, it's set and there's a Ditbach that enters a body. Now, you chose not to have a Ditbach story that deals with also a marriage that fails, or at least a love interest. You chose something called a mazik, a mischievous person, the mischievous person who stays with this Holocaust survivor. Mm-hmm. And then you have issues dealing with the Holocaust and the trauma, and also the wife of the survivor who herself has her trauma, and in addition, Alzheimer's. How did you manage to pull this all together?
Yeah. It was once I kind of had the setting and I had my main character in terms of Yaakov, I thought, okay, if we're going to, it was Dark Night of the Soul pressure cooker. If we're going to put someone in this pressure cooker of a house, what can we throw at them and what would be interesting? And so, there was the one thread of the mazik and figuring out, what that would be. I knew I didn't want to do a Ditbach because there's just too many Ditbachs around. So coming to the mazik felt original and different, and this is a real thing. But then there was no description of what it was. So I had to, in the terms of the rabbinic literature, there's no description of a mazik. So I had to kind of make it up. And I purposely wanted to create something that was in embodiment of the very themes of the film.
It won't let you leave.
We have to go now.
I've left many times, but where is it for me to go? My obligation is to my home, my Reuben. I can suffer. My pain was not his.
Mrs. Litbach, what won't let me leave?
The music. It's playing with you. The way a cat plays with a mouse. It wants your pain. It will make you see things. Terrible things. Me, I am not enough for it. But your agony.
We're leaving. We have to go now. There is something very, very wrong here.
If you run out, the music will make you crawl right back.
At the same time, when you've got a very contained sort of picture and story, you have to have other things to bounce the main character off of. So came up with the idea of Miss Litbach being in the house. It'd be far too easy if Miss Litbach was someone who's like, oh, here's how you deal with this, or here's how you get out, or, so having her have severe dementia would seem like, okay, that's great. She's unreliable. And if that's your one life, that's your one lifeboat in the house, is the unreliable person who may or may not be seeing what you're seeing, that just, amps up that unease. At the same time, it's a great way to get exposition out. It's a great way to with films, it's always hard to hide the exposition, because there's an unnatural sense to the way dialogue unfolds in movies, because people are saying things they wouldn't normally say. So where do you put that stuff? How do you make that stuff feel organic? So it was creating these characters to get to that central thing.
And being that central character, Dave, you're sitting there and Keith is throwing all kinds of things at you, including a spider? What was that all about?
Well, it's a funny story, actually. My first time reading the script, I was reading it out loud to my girlfriend, and I was attempting to frighten her. And I was reading the script in the scariest way possible. It doesn't need much help. The way it's written and with the sounds, and Keith did such a great job of putting some of the music already baked into the script. So I'd pull it up on my phone and I'd play it as I'm reading it. And it really was building this vibe. And as Yaakov is descending deeper into his fear in the night, I started to kind of do like that and distract myself. Like, what did I see over there? To the point where my girlfriend who's listening to me is going, what are you looking at? What is that? What are you doing? And I jokingly said that I was summoning the demons from the script. And suddenly behind us on the wall was the biggest spider I've ever seen. And I had never seen a spider like that before. She was like, oh, it's a wolf spider. And I was like, what is a wolf spider? That thing's horrifying. And we shoot it outside. I say we, but she did it because I was terrified. And we kept reading the script. And on the very next page, and it says in the script, a wolf spider crawls across Yaakov's foot. And I was like, what? It was just this incredible moment of, did I summon a spider? Is the script reading? Like, what is this kismet going on? It actually continued to happen because we kept reading. And in the script, there's the tick, 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 tick of the clock. And I was going tick, tick. And all of a sudden in the room, we're hearing, okay, what is that? Is this an old creaky house? What's going on? It turned out to be a dying cricket underneath the bed, jumping into the bed frame, creating this ticking noise. And at that point, she said, the script is banned. You can only read it in the daytime. I finished it the next day. And it was really this amazing moment of like, I realized in that moment, I have to do this film. This script is incredible. It spoke to me. I loved the character. I loved the challenge. And when we actually filmed that scene, it was a whole litany of other challenges that went on that Keith can tell you about. But the spider really became a central figure for me, at least as an actor. Maybe not for Yakov as much, but for me, the spider was huge.
So unfortunately, our time has ended. We could go on and on and on. I'm just having so much fun. I certainly did not have fun watching the film. Keith, there were moments that were actually comical. So when you, just to sort of finish up, when you create a movie, and here is a horror film, how do you integrate comedy into that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are definitely for me, it's again this the catharsis is a huge piece. I think people love horror films because of that kind of cathartic release that they get. I personally I like to use the analogy of the roller coaster. My favorite part of the roller coaster is when you're heading up the hill. It's the and you're getting closer and closer to the apex, and you're looking over. When you go over and you scream, that's the cathartic, right? You're suddenly releasing that tension. I like stretching out the tension before the release. And so, that was a big, piece of what I was trying to do and what I was going for in this. And part of that cathartic piece was humor. Dave and I kind of found it as well, just as we were making the film, at the point where he, turns on the flashlight to look, it gets laughs because of the kind of setup earlier as a payoff. But I think those laughs are cathartic laughs because it's a very tense moment. So it's important to let the audience have a little bit of a break from time to time and kind of do the thing they want to do, which is not be stressed for a little moment. I also think that if you release some of that stress, then when you get back in it, it builds even more. So it's almost like a torture scenario where you give them a little bit of a break before you really go at them. So, it was important to build that in. It just felt natural to the story as well. I often, when I was writing it and when we were making it, put myself in Yaakov's position. And I thought, if I was sitting here and this was happening, I would probably be laughing at a certain point because it's ridiculous. Like, what is happening here? I think that's a normal and a natural reaction. And I was happy we captured some of it. You're never sure if some of that works, but it was great when we at the first premiere to see it and say, see people laughing. Like, okay, good, that worked.
What a delight. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. The film is called The Vigil. And Keith, I'm looking forward to Lilith or Ashmedai. Or, you can create this whole
right, or our shared Jewish universe or horror universe. Yes.
Thank you so much. And catch the film. It's really quite an incredible piece of art. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yes,
thank you, Eric.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Pleasure for me too.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.